When she whispered, "If you're brave enough, come after midnight," I thought it was just a test of courage. But it became the night that changed everything I thought I knew about desire, restraint, and her. The evening had unfolded like so many others at my friend's house, casual, easy, and filled with the kind of background noise that makes you feel safe. The television hummed softly in the living room, my friend half absorbed in a game on his console, while the smell of freshly brewed tea drifted faintly from the kitchen. I had been there countless times, but that night, for reasons I couldn't explain, everything seemed to hold a different weight, as though something quiet but important hovered just out of reach. His mother moved gracefully around the house, never hurried, never loud, always carrying herself with a kind of quiet presence. She wasn't a woman who demanded attention, yet you noticed her. Maybe it was the way her voice seemed to cut through the background noise when she spoke, or the calm steadiness in her eyes when they lingered on you a moment longer than you expected. I caught her watching me once, leaning casually against the doorway as she folded a dish towel in her hands. There was nothing obvious about it, no dramatic pause, no exaggerated look. Just a subtle stillness, like she was studying something she already knew but wanted to understand again. When our eyes met, she gave the faintest smile, the kind that felt both reassuring and unsettling at the same time. Later, when my friend went upstairs to grab something, the house grew quieter, the hum of the console pausing with him. I stayed in the living room, absently scrolling through my phone, but I could feel her presence before she even entered. She walked in softly, her robe sleeves brushing against her wrists, the fabric catching the golden lamplight. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at me, calm, unhurried, as though choosing her words carefully. And when she did speak, her voice was low enough that it almost felt like it belonged to the room itself, not just her. "If you're brave enough," she said, tilting her head slightly, her eyes locked onto mine. "Come after midnight." The words hung in the air, simple but heavy. They weren't playful exactly, but neither were they cold. It was as though she'd placed a key in my hand and walked away, leaving me to decide whether I wanted to find the door it unlocked. Before I could form a response, my friend's footsteps returned on the stairs. She glanced toward the sound, then back at me, her expression smoothing into something almost unreadable. With the softest of nods, she turned and slipped out of the room, leaving behind only the faint trace of her perfume and the echo of her words repeating in my head. I laughed off the rest of the evening with my friend, but the truth was, I was no longer really there. Every glance at the clock, every quiet pause in the conversation seemed to pull me back to that moment. After midnight. The words pulsed like a secret under my skin, daring me, questioning me, promising something I didn't yet understand. When I finally returned home that evening, the world felt strangely quieter, as though the streets themselves carried her words back with me. My room, usually a place of comfort, felt too small, too still. I sat on the edge of my bed, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, but every few minutes my eyes drifted to the clock glowing faintly on my nightstand. 10 o'clock. Then 10:30. Time seemed to move with deliberate slowness, as though the night wanted me to wrestle with what had been said. "If you're brave enough, come after midnight." I replayed it again and again, searching for the tone behind her voice. Was it a challenge? A joke meant to unsettle me? Or something far more layered, something she didn't want to put into plain words? Each possibility tied me into tighter knots. I tried distracting myself. I pulled a book from the shelf and stared at the pages until the words blurred into meaningless ink. I turned on some music, but even the songs felt like background noise, their rhythms out of sync with the pounding of my heart. I even stepped to the window, watching the empty street below, the occasional streetlight humming with static. Nothing worked. Her voice was everywhere. I leaned back, pressing my palms against my eyes as if I could block the thoughts out. But that only brought back her face, the way her expression had softened into something unreadable after she spoke. Not flirtatious, not mocking. Just steady. Intentional. My mind argued with itself in circles. One part of me whispered of boundaries, of consequences, of how reckless it would be to take her words literally. She was my friend's mother. That alone should have been enough reason to dismiss it. But another part of me, the part that noticed the way her eyes lingered, the part that remembered the faint scent of her perfume, told me it wasn't just a passing comment. That there was a door opening, and it was up to me to decide if I would step through it. By 11, I was pacing my room, the floor creaking softly under my feet. The air felt too thick to breathe. I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw how restless I looked, shoulders tight, jaw set, eyes darting as if expecting answers that weren't there. "Don't be ridiculous," I muttered under my breath, trying to steady myself. Yet even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't be able to stay put. Midnight was drawing closer, and with it, a pull stronger than reason. At 11:30, I sat back down on the bed, elbows on my knees, staring at the clock. The ticking filled the silence, steady and merciless. I felt like I was sitting on the edge of something vast and unexplainable, a threshold that scared me and drew me in at the same time. By 11:50, I knew. My heart was already answering the question my mind had tried to avoid. I couldn't let the moment pass me by, not when it carried the promise of something I didn't even have the words for yet. The clock struck 12. My chest tightened. I stood, slipped on my jacket, and stepped into the cool embrace of the night. The door clicked shut behind me, and for a moment I simply stood there, letting the night air press against my skin. It was cooler than I expected, a faint trace of rain still clinging to the earth, the streets carrying that damp, metallic scent that always follows a storm. My breath rose in thin clouds, vanishing quickly in the darkness, as if even the air didn't want to linger too long around me. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes, the rustle of tree branches swaying in the faint wind, even the distant hum of a lone car somewhere blocks away. The world was quiet, but not empty, alive in the way it only is when most people are asleep. Each step seemed louder than the last, and yet, no matter how much I told myself to slow down, my pace carried me forward almost against my will. The closer I walked toward her street, the more my mind shifted from uncertainty to anticipation. I replayed the scene over and over, the tilt of her head, the calm certainty in her voice, the way she looked at me as if she knew I wouldn't be able to resist. After midnight. The words rang like a quiet promise, a test, and a confession all at once. The lamps along the road cast pools of amber light, stretching long shadows across the pavement. My own shadow walked beside me, elongated and wavering, like a quieter version of myself, one that seemed braver, more certain, even while my chest felt like it was being pulled in two directions. One step forward, one step back. Yet forward always one. As I turned the final corner onto her street, the familiar row of houses stretched before me, their windows mostly dark. A dog barked in the distance, sharp and sudden, then fell silent. The neighborhood was asleep, and I was intruding, walking through a silence I wasn't sure I had the right to disturb. Her house came into view, a faint golden glow spilling from the curtains in the front room. Not much, just enough to suggest someone was awake waiting. My pulse quickened. It would have been easier if the house had been completely dark, if I could have told myself she had forgotten, or that it had been a careless remark after all. But that light, that single lamp burning quietly in the night, was proof. By the time I reached her front gate, my heart was thundering in my chest. My palms were damp despite the cool air. I hesitated, fingers brushing the iron railing as if the touch might ground me. The whole world seemed to hold its breath, the night pausing in anticipation of what I would do next. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of choice pressing down on me. Then, finally, I drew a breath, steadied myself, and stepped forward. Each step up the path felt heavier, louder, more certain. At her door, I lifted my hand, hesitated one final time, and then knocked softly. The moment after my knock stretched on endlessly. I could hear the faint hum of the night around me, the chirp of a cricket, the sigh of the wind against the trees, but no sound from within the house. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe I had wanted to believe there was more in her words than there really was. Just as the thought began to settle, I heard it, the soft shuffle of steps on the other side of the door. My chest tightened. The lock clicked faintly, followed by the gentle creak of hinges opening. And then she was there. She stood framed in the doorway, a single lamp from the living room behind her casting her figure in warm light. Her hair was loose, falling in gentle waves over her shoulders, catching the glow in strands that looked almost golden. She wore a robe, simple, soft, tied loosely at her waist, and though it was modest, there was something about it that felt impossibly intimate, as though I had been invited into a side of her life no one else saw. For a moment neither of us spoke. She didn't smile, didn't rush to fill the silence. Her eyes moved over my face slowly, searching, as though to see if I really understood what I was doing there. And the truth was, I wasn't sure I did. The scent of her perfume drifted toward me, subtle but unmistakable, mixing with the warmth of the house that seemed to spill out into the night air. It was the kind of scent you couldn't forget once you noticed it, soft, elegant, carrying a quiet depth. Finally, she stepped aside, her hand brushing the edge of the door as she gave the faintest nod toward the hallway. The movement was small, but it was enough. My pulse leapt as I stepped forward, crossing the threshold into her space. For the briefest instant, our shoulders nearly touched, and even without contact I could feel the nearness of her body, an awareness so sharp it made the rest of the world blur away. The house was hushed, more so than I'd ever known it to be. The ticking clock on the wall felt almost too loud, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly distinct. She closed the door quietly behind me, turning the lock with a care that felt deliberate, final. When I glanced at her again, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not playful, not stern, just steady, almost contemplative. It was as if she was weighing something in her mind, something unspoken. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound foolish? That I didn't know why I was there? That I couldn't stop thinking about her voice, her look, that invitation? The silence stretched between us, not awkward, but charged, thick with everything neither of us dared to say out loud. She gestured softly toward the living room, her robe sleeve brushing against her wrist as she moved. Without a word I followed her, each step deeper into the house making my heart beat louder in my ears. The living room felt transformed at this hour. I had been in it many times before, usually filled with the chatter of a TV, the clinking of teacups, or my friends' careless laughter. But now, it was wrapped in a kind of hush that made every detail feel sharper. A single lamp glowed in the corner, casting long, soft shadows across the furniture. The faint hum of the refrigerator drifted from the kitchen, the clock ticked steadily on the wall, and underneath it all was the sound of my own heartbeat, uncomfortably loud in my ears. She moved toward the couch, her robe brushing against her ankles as she walked, and settled down gracefully. She didn't cross her legs or fold into herself the way some people do. Instead, she carried a kind of quiet composure, as though every movement was deliberate. She gestured gently for me to sit beside her, and I did, though I left a careful space between us at first. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, almost alive, full of things unsaid. I shifted on the couch, trying to find words, but she was the one who finally broke it. "Why did you come?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It wasn't teasing either. It was calm, measured, as though she was asking something far deeper than the question itself. I hesitated, my eyes dropping to my hands. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said." The words sounded clumsy, but they were the truth. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not playful, not mocking, but something closer to sad. "And do you know what it means? To be here?" I shook my head. "No. But I knew I'd regret it if I didn't come." Her gaze lingered on me, steady and thoughtful. Then, almost as though she needed to anchor the moment, she shifted the conversation to gentler ground. We spoke of small things first: how quiet the house felt at night, how long the week had seemed, how rare it was to find time for stillness. But slowly, the words deepened. She told me about loneliness, not in a dramatic way, but with the kind of quiet honesty that felt heavier than tears. How the house sometimes felt too big when everyone else was asleep. How she longed, at times, for someone to simply sit with her without judgment or expectation. And I told her how I often felt adrift, caught between being too young to be taken seriously and too old to pretend I didn't care. How strange it felt to want more from life but not know what more even looked like. At some point, as the conversation wove between us, her hand brushed against mine on the couch. It was subtle, almost accidental. But she didn't pull away. Neither did I. The warmth of her skin lingered against me, quiet but electric, grounding me in a way words never could. The minutes stretched quietly, almost suspended, as we sat side by side on that couch. Our words had slowed, thinning into pauses that carried their own weight. It was strange, how silence between two people could say more than the most carefully chosen sentences. I shifted slightly, resting my arm on the back of the couch, and in that small movement our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pretended it was accidental. Her fingers lingered against mine, light at first, almost tentative, then slowly more certain, resting in place as though they had found where they belong. I looked at her, and she was already looking at me. Her eyes held mine for longer than was comfortable, yet I couldn't look away. There was no disguise in them, no attempt to soften or hide what she felt. They carried both strength and fragility, like someone who had spent years keeping control, only to let a little slip in this moment. She leaned forward slightly, reaching for the blanket folded on the arm of the couch. With a quiet care, she shook it out and laid it gently over my shoulders, smoothing it down with her hand. The gesture was tender, maternal in one sense, but the way her palm lingered against my shoulder was something entirely different. I felt the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of my shirt, a gentle pressure that seemed to steady me even as it made my pulse race. Her touch trailed lightly down my arm before slipping away, but the absence of it was louder than the touch itself. I swallowed hard, unsure if I should speak or stay silent. Words felt clumsy compared to what that small gesture had already said. She drew in a quiet breath, her gaze lowering briefly before returning to mine. "This can't last forever," she whispered. Her voice trembled just enough to betray what her composure tried to hide. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. "I know." For a moment, it felt as if everything might collapse under the weight of that truth. Yet instead of retreating, she moved a little closer. Our shoulders touched now, lightly, but the contact sent a warmth spreading through me that no blanket could match. I could feel the faint rise and fall of her breathing, steady but a little quicker than before. Her hand, resting on the couch between us, shifted until her fingers brushed the back of mine once more. She didn't lace them together, didn't hold on fully, but the quiet contact was enough. It was as if the space between us had been dissolved into something fragile and electric, a secret tether no one else could see. We stayed like that for a long while, close but restrained, saying nothing yet speaking everything. The pull to cross that invisible line, to reach for her fully, was strong, aching even. But neither of us moved further. It was in the holding back, in the quiet discipline, that the moment became almost unbearable in its intensity. The night seemed endless, yet fragile, like a candle flame burning low, flickering softly against the weight of the dark. We sat there for what felt like hours, though time had lost its meaning. The lamp still glowed gently in the corner, casting golden light across her face, highlighting the quiet depth in her eyes. Neither of us spoke much anymore. Words had carried us this far, but now it felt as though silence was safer, more honest. Eventually, though, even silence began to shift. A faint light edged the curtains, a whisper of dawn brushing against the room. The world outside was waking, and with it came the quiet reminder that this moment couldn't remain suspended forever. She was the one who finally stirred, drawing a slow breath as if steadying herself. Her hand slipped away from mine, lingering just long enough to make its absence felt. She looked at me then, not with regret, not with fear, but with a kind of acceptance that made my chest ache. "It's morning," she said softly, her voice almost breaking the spell of the night. I nodded, my throat tight, unsure if I trusted myself to speak. She rose from the couch, smoothing the folds of her robe, and gestured gently toward the door. The movement wasn't abrupt, but deliberate, as though she needed to carry us both back to reality. I stood too, feeling strangely unsteady, as if I had stepped out of a dream too soon. We walked together down the quiet hallway. My steps felt heavier with every one I took, like each was leading me away from something I wasn't ready to leave. At the door, she paused, her hand resting lightly on the handle. Then, instead of opening it right away, she turned to me. For a heartbeat, we stood face to face in the stillness. Her eyes searched mine, and then, slowly, carefully, her hand reached out, slipping into mine. Her fingers were warm, steady, holding with a kind of firmness that felt both reluctant and necessary. I closed my hand around hers, letting the moment stretch, feeling the weight of everything unspoken between us. "You were brave enough," she whispered. Her lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "That's all I needed to know." The words struck me deeper than I expected. They weren't a declaration, nor a promise, but something gentler, more profound. A recognition. A secret held between us that would never need to be explained to anyone else. Finally, she let go, her hand slipping from mine as she turned the lock and opened the door. Cool morning air drifted in, brushing against my skin like a reminder that the world outside was waiting, indifferent to what had just passed. I stepped out onto the path, pausing once to look back. She stood in the doorway, framed by the soft glow of the lamp behind her, her expression calm yet touched with something I would carry with me for a long time. She gave me the smallest nod, and then, with quiet grace, she closed the door. As I walked away, the street bathed in the first light of day, I felt a strange mix of ache and peace. The night hadn't given me everything I thought I wanted, but it had given me something I didn't know I needed. A memory carved deep, tender and bittersweet, a secret marked forever by her words.